Elizabeth Snyder.
And I'm Dr. Julie Galvin, and we're here from the Galvin Growth Group located in Novi, Michigan. And we are doing our final chapter of the Entangled book by Dr. Lisa Damour, where she talks about the 7 strands of development that adolescent girls go through. And we've just really enjoyed sharing this book with each other, with you guys, reading the chapters together and talking through each developmental strand. And today we're covering the final strand, which is, let me get the title right, Caring for Herself.
Mm-hmm.
In it, she talks about this is where they finally do the work of taking care of themselves, making their own independent decisions about health and safety and what we can do and what we might not want to do in terms of supporting them and developing these skills in this final strand. And she addresses some of the tough issues like sex and drugs and alcohol, and how do we talk to our girls about that too? What did you think about it, Dr. Snyder?
Yeah, I think that this chapter really hits at some of the biggest anxieties parents have about the adolescent years, right? Drugs, sex, and alcohol are kind of the 3 big things that parents worry about and really want to help their children tackle in an independent, intelligent, rational way, right? No matter what values you might have on these different topics, having your child understand the pros, the cons, the benefits, the ramifications of their choices, I think is every parent's goal. So how do you get them to understand these things that adolescents might be hesitant to talk to you about, and there might be a lot of peer pressure around? And one of the concepts that she talks about in the chapter that I really love is this idea of the veil of obedience and how to avoid it. So the veil of obedience is this idea that once an adult starts lecturing to an adolescent, especially girls, they will start going, yep, okay, mom, yep, I understand, right? And they are totally tuned out, not listening, just nodding and smiling and saying what you want to hear so that the conversation will end and they can go do what they want to do. So she really talks about being on the lookout for that kind of behavior and stepping back and saying like, whoa, okay, my girl is not tuned in. How can I reframe this conversation? How can I get on her level? How can I support and ask questions and have an authentic conversation versus maybe more of a lecture that I think a lot of parents are just naturally more comfortable with, like this is what to do, this is what not to do. But again, girls tend to tune that out and won't confront you about it, but will just sit there and go, yep. And if you're not tuned into that, you might miss an opportunity to really have a better conversation about it.
I do. I think it's that transition from it's kind of like we talked about it in a couple chapters ago, where they think we're the all-knowing, right? And whatever we say is true and we're flawless, all that stuff. And I think it relates here too. Like we've made that transition and we can talk now at more of an equal level, to not be lecturing at her, but just asking her questions and things to consider for her. What might her friends do? What might those risks be? So that, again, she can have these kind of habits of thinking critically about different situations when she's out and about on her own, to make those good, healthy decisions for herself when we're not there to kind of help her through them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's a lot of information on these different topics. And I think you're right, just having that conversation, understanding where she's coming from. I mean, the generational differences, we talked about that last week with relationships, can be very different, right? There's these generational differences. So understanding, right, that laws are changing, understanding about drugs is changing, more evidence is coming out, right? Talking about maybe some detrimental side effects and maybe some positive medicinal side effects of various drugs too. So it can be hard. Laws don't always keep up with, what the science knows. And I know in the book, one thing that I think I'd like to clarify is in the book, she talks about referring to the laws and kind of saying, illegal drugs are illegal because they're dangerous. And I think that in today's age, you might get some pushback from your teenager if you approach it that way. And I think referring to the evidence, the research, which is kind of always coming out and always changing, and using that to have a rational discussion. I mean, we know that marijuana use during the teenage years has a significant detrimental impact on the teenage brain, more so, way more so than if you were to use it, as an adult or later in life. So having that understanding on the physiological side effects of some of these things and how they can have lifelong impacts on their brain development is really important. And I think goes beyond more of that black and white discussion of, is it illegal or not?
Mm-hmm. And she does. She uses that as a framework to discuss not only drugs, but also alcohol and sex. And looking at it from the physiological effects of all of those things. And so it's not that we're trying to push a moral judgment or value judgment onto the issue and onto them, but really look at the science. And this is what happens when kids drink. It affects their pleasure centers of their brain, and they're way more likely to be addicts or addicted to alcohol than an adult would be. And so I think that once they understand this, again, it makes sense at a deeper level about why they should be cautious about experimenting with some of these things, and just tools them when they're out and about in the world to make good decisions for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I think on the opposite side of that, what the chapter also discusses is how to foster positive, healthy, coping styles and healthy self-care. So, eating right, exercising right, sleeping right. How do we help our teenage girls develop those habits also? And I know those things are kind of something that you're pretty passionate about, Dr. Galvin.
I am. I talk about that with clients all the time in our practice in terms of making sure that's the foundational things that we need to have in place in order to live a healthy, balanced life. So, sleeping and diet and exercise are certainly 3 prongs that I really focus on. And I really like that she does that because it encourages us not just to have a discussion about it, but also to model it ourselves. And if all of us in our family live that way, where we're making conscious decisions about watching our sleep and getting healthy exercise and, watching our sleep, getting exercise, eating healthy, balanced diet, then we're much more likely to have modeled that. They've internalized that, and they're doing it for the right reasons. We don't want them to diet necessarily to lose weight. And she talks about eating disorders and it's about food for sustenance. It's not about looks, And so again, it makes so much sense when you think about it, that we talk about the very roots of why we should be doing these things, all of us, parents and kids alike. And I think it resonates with them better, and they're more likely to internalize it and live a healthy lifestyle throughout their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you talk about leading by example. And I think one of the red flags to look out for in your family is if these are really common topics of conversation in the negative or in a tense way. If you're always talking about food and healthy food and unhealthy food, or if you're always talking about whether they got enough sleep, or you're always saying you should go out and get some exercise, you should do this. If you're catching those things being daily points of conversation, if you catch yourself, for lack of a better word, nagging your kids to do these things, that might be a sign that these issues have kind of escalated and they're becoming maybe a point of tension in the household. So that's when you might want to take a step back and do some reflection. How can we start to help our girls understand these things as just part of their lifestyle versus something that becomes, a point of tension or a point of argument? Because we don't want to make healthy eating, healthy sleeping, healthy exercise a power struggle between us and our girls, because that's not going to lead to a place we want to go.
And it just sets them up beautifully, I think, for, if they go off to college after high school or they're going to live on their own, working or whatever, that they have the skill set, because we all know what it's like to go to campus and live in a dorm where all of this stuff kind of goes out the window. But if they've internalized these habits and the values of having them, they're much more likely to be successful living independently when they're not under a roof any longer.
Absolutely. And knowing when, okay, it's okay that I'll lose sleep, a couple of nights in a row to go have fun with my friends, but then returning to that schedule because they understand the importance of it, right? It's not without mistake. It's not without freedom to kind of change these things up for certain circumstances. But like exactly what you said, it's about understanding the foundation and returning to it to kind of keep that healthy lifestyle.
So I think overall, we've certainly enjoyed going through these 7 developmental strands with you. We have one more episode where we're going to talk about the conclusion of the book and kind of wrap it all up. But certainly, I think there were some really good messages in here that helps us remind us in terms of what we should be doing with our own lifestyles and how we can model that for the kids and being independent and healthy lifestyles.
Absolutely. So, check out our blog, like and share. We'll be back with one more episode, like Dr. Galvin said, to kind of wrap everything up. So we will see you then.
Thank you.